Well, I'm thrilled to welcome Axios super reporter Alex Thompson, who both is the winner of the 2025 White House Correspondents Association Award for excellence in White House coverage and currently number one New York Times bestseller co-author, which is pretty kick-ass, man. Congratulations. Thank you for joining us. As always, for our attendees, we bought what should be enough copies for everybody who wants one. We got 125. I'll send the link around to everybody. But thanks for making the time, Alex. I know how busy you are, given how popular this book is.
Honestly, thanks for the invite. This is great.
Awesome. So, look, the underlying story is pretty well known by now. We all lived it. You guys have made pretty good rounds. The Biden administration intention and campaign intentionally covered up the president's cognitive decline, in part aided and abetted by legacy media, until the debate fiasco made additional cover up impossible. You were on this story earlier than a whole lot of other reporters. What got you focused on this and deciding that this was something you wanted to report on and keep reporting on?
I mean, like any reporter, you have sources that start telling you stuff. Also, I've always been pretty comfortable, just saying what I think. I think at times reporters in DC, and you've seen this I think you could argue there's an ideological motivation in this administration, but you've seen groupthink, among DC reporters in past administrations, Democratic and Republican alike. Um, the first the first sign to me that there was something that was off was the fact that after his first year in office, like Joe Biden used to be the easiest quote in all of Washington, D.C. He was so easy a quote that reporters would often walk the other way because they knew that it would take up 45 minutes of their time. And after the first year of his presidency, it was the most non-press friendly first year of a presidency in modern history, in the TV era. And I think it was clear, and people behind the scenes were telling me this, that part of the reason was because they didn't trust him to not screw up. And then starting in 2023, there were a few things. One was sources behind the scenes. Once it became clear that from their perspective, oh my God, he's actually going to try to be president till 2029. Some sources finally started leaking in a way they hadn't before. And despite the White House's denials, at times on the record, I mean, please, when I wrote my first big story for Axios in April of 2023, that included some of the details about the limitations of his 10 to 4 schedule that were frustrating people inside the building because they could not get important meetings on the schedule. The White House went on the record and said false. And that was from Deputy Chief of Staff Jen O'Malley Dillon, who eventually went on to chair the campaign. Some other reporters, I think, when you have someone at that high level denying it on the record, I think that affects how you feel about things. But because people were telling me stuff from inside the building, and as soon as it was clear that he was going to run for re-election, I felt that every single little thing the White House was doing to adapt to his limitations, both physical and energy or mental, whatever you want to say, every single little thing was worthy of a big story because he was trying to go for another 4 years. So even if it was a small thing that a lot of liberals were like, why do we care that he is using tennis shoes? And my answer was, well, because he's going for 4 more years. It may not be that important now, but it is signifying something that could be, a really big deal of his limitations, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and it could really affect how he governs in the second term.
All right. So as you're writing this, and April 2023 is definitely early. How are your stories being received as compared to a lot of the other stuff you wrote, whether by readers or the White House or even Axios management? And did you ever face any pressure to check more than you might a normal story about the White House or otherwise back off?
I mean, not within Axios, but outside of Axios, yeah, 100%. I mean, it was definitely. you know, 2023 and 2024 were honestly like really unpleasant times for me in some ways, like professionally and personally, because DC's a small town. The Biden White House was very good at, sort of subtly raising questions and trying to undermine, um, reporters to other reporters. And they were certainly doing that to me. They obviously had plenty of their people online, attack me on X or Twitter or other forms of social media. I mean, that stuff happens. They certainly at times, even without asking me, went over my head to my bosses and complained about me and said I was like a hater, said I was this and that. To Axios' credit, so Jim Vandehei, Mike Gallen, David Lindsay, they had my back. They would say, hey, and it would also loop me in all the time. But yeah, I mean, like the White House, I mean, it's not surprising because the White House believed that the 2024 election was a fight for America's democracy and also their own jobs. And clearly, his Joe Biden's age was one of the most important issues in the election, and they weren't gonna just take these stories sitting back.
Um, so I wondered, you mentioned, you were starting to hear from sources, and then there were little tells like shoes, tennis shoes, and certainly you're right. Somebody who was known to be the most garrulous guy ever was suddenly invisible, and that didn't fit. Although to be fair, he also, when you're the president, as he called himself one day, a human gaff machine, you might want to have a little more control over. But did you ever have what I might call a George Clooney moment before the debate? Something where you went from, hey, it's worth thinking about because we're not just talking about 2024, we're talking about 4 years beyond that. But did you have something before the debate where you had the same experience that Clooney had at that fundraiser and the rest of us had watching the debate where it was like, oh, wow?
No, because they never let me anywhere near Joe Biden. I was in the pool a few times. I traveled abroad with him in May of 2022 and was certainly in a bunch of conferences. But I was, it's interesting. They were very selective about who got questions at any press conference. I covered Joe Biden for 4 years. I never got a question. And I never had really any up close moments. There were obviously I saw what other people were seeing, and so one of the difficult things about this story was I was basically relying on people that were actually seeing him behind closed doors.
Yeah, and I guess you also have to then do a double layer of motivation. Are these people who are,
Hmm.
coming to you because they're worried about the country or because maybe they've got a different horse for the primary? A whole lot of people came after the election. You guys got what, 200 sources eager to talk after it all happened. Um, Let me ask you, if I can, about your co-author, Jake Tapper, who by all accounts is a great guy and obviously it's a pretty smart person to co-author with. He's a very prominent and respected journalist. But as Megyn Kelly sort of kind of not so gently pointed out, he was certainly for a while among those who were poo-pooing your reporting, not specific to you, but directionally your reporting, and others who were suggesting that the president shouldn't run again, and he was readier to embrace it as Trumpian fake news. How did you guys come to partner on this? And did you ever have a question about, is he potentially part of the story more than someone who could objectively cover it, either because of where he was or because, hell hath no fury, he kind of got burned, and he didn't come off to me like in any of the interviews like he had an axe to grind, but it would be pretty human if he did.
I'm glad you asked this question because I think a lot of people at like because you're not alone. Some people don't have the guts to sort of just plainly ask it. No, I had zero concerns, and the best clip that they have that some of Jake's critics have is from 2020. And in October of 2020, with his interview of Laura Trump, and I think like most journalists should do, he's admitted like, hey, I should have done better in 2020. But also, I wasn't really covering Biden's age in 2020. Most reporters weren't. The first time I really covered it in any significant way was June of 2021, November of 2021, and then really started honing in on it in 2023. Um, and also, Jake is not a White House correspondent. Jake is covering the full field. And Jake, I can tell you, like any reporter on a beat, you can tell which reporters are the suck ups, which ones are sort of lazy, which ones are like aggressive. Jake was not the Joe Biden's favorite White House reporter by any means. He was like, you look at his coverage of Afghanistan as just one example, back in like August 2021, one of the toughest, like you want to call it like legacy, mainstream media, corporate media, whatever. And so honestly, so when Jake and this book was Jake Tapper's idea. And I was on set with him November 4th, the day before the election. And he said, "Hey, I've been thinking about this." Jake Tapper obviously was also like the was watching the presidential debate on June 27th. He co-moderated it, and I think it was just in his head all those months later. And he was like, I've been thinking about doing a book, and he would say he's like, because we were friends, but we weren't like let's write a book together friends. And he impulsively was just like, would you be interested? And I was like, sure, 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 sure. And then not thinking anything was going to come of it. And then I woke up in the middle of the night on November 6th because I'd been on air from 4 to 7 a.m. Uh, with like three drafts of a book proposal. And listen, I'm not going to name names, but like there are there are a large number of reporters that in DC and that covered Biden that if they had suggested this, I would have said no way in hell. And Jake wasn't even close to that list. So I never thought twice about it, and I've been a little bit surprised at some of the criticism, in all honesty.
Yeah, and honestly, my own take. I mean, first, I thought you guys, it's a great book. I didn't perceive any bias one way or the other. The fact that he was in, at the debate, I thought was kind of a good contributing factor to it all. And my own take of watching plenty of the interviews that he's done is, he takes the hits straight on, and he's not trying to, do anything other than, he'll if you show him a quote, he'll take the criticism. To your point, 2020, but I thought it was very well done. I was interested though if the thought had gone through your head, and I appreciate your
Yeah.
answer on that. Um, so
It's a good question, and I hope I'm defending Jake, but I think I am only aggressive because I think there is this sort of conventional wisdom, and I just want to make clear, like,
totally
from my
get it.
perspective, like there are so many people in Washington journalism that I would have felt that way about that would have had a second question, and I just never felt that way about Jake.
Well, I hoped you would, and I'm glad you did. So let me ask you this. One of the things that I take away from the book, once I'd read it, is it seems like it's impossible for those who actually spent a lot of time with the president to not see what was going on. Jake at times has suggested that the core of the story is a White House that was intentionally deceiving the media and voters. And I'm interested in your I mean, the book gets into all of the possibilities, but your sense of the why, like what was the motivation for these guys? Was it to remain in power themselves, lack of faith that the vice president could carry the torch, and belief that she probably correctly would be the nominee? Did they genuinely, honestly think that only Joe Biden, in the condition notwithstanding, was the only person with the talent or the brand who could beat him? And to your point, uh, even if you thought he could run across the finish line in 24, do you get the sense inside they genuinely believed he had 4 years to be the energetic president one needs?
So my first instinct to all those questions is all of the above. I want to take the last thing that you asked first because I do think it is why this story is scandalous is because with the exception of the few hyper loyalists that do and some members of the family that do believe he could have been president till January 2029 and been effective, there are scores of people within the Biden administration that we talked to that would, and that I even talked to before the election, before the debate, that would openly acknowledge that they did not believe he could be an effective president till January 2029. Even though, and they're sort of, you hear this in some of the interviews now, where they're like, well, I wasn't involved in the politics, so I wasn't involved in the re-election decision. Maybe that was a bad decision. Uh, you know, it's very blasé to say that he was running to be the like to have his finger on the nuclear button for 4 more years, and there are only a handful of people that believe he was capable of doing that job for 4 more years. And I think it's also clear if you read the book that, and people have told us this, that uh, those handful of people that still believe were among the most powerful people in the White House. And there are like Biden diehards that believe a Biden second term would have ended up in a constitutional crisis because those people were clearly not willing to give up power. So, in terms of your other motivations, I would also add one, which is that if you believe Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, you can justify anything. And that is a lot of what happened with a lot of these people. And that's on like the nice end, right? Like, or the more like I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. On the more cynical end, they were like, the country is better off if we're in charge. And they, and I don't know if they'd ever admit that to themselves, but I do think that was, I do think that was a part of, sometimes you can talk yourself, you can dress up your own self-interest into like higher explanation and rationalization, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense, and the book does a wonderful job of an all of the above approach to motivations. It was for some people all of those things. It is always worrisome when people conclude that the other side is so existential. I mean, that's what the January 6th rioters believe too.
Yep.
And it's why it's so important that we have norms and guardrails. One of the things you guys talked a lot about, and you mentioned on this interview already, was that your sources noted the president was sharpest for a window from the late morning to sort of mid-afternoon with somewhat diminishing ability to focus thereafter. And the campaign tried to schedule their political events in the window, which makes sense, sort of the window of maximum lucidity. Did the Politburo, which is your wonderful name for the senior staff, who by the way are many of my people I know and like and respect, but it's a great name anyway. Did the Politburo also schedule official business within this window? And have you guys heard of decisions that had to be postponed because he just wasn't? We gotta have to punt this for a day. He's not up for this, or even let's just decide this at the staff level because it's not we're not going to get the right discussion now.
It's a great question. I'd also add, it wasn't us that came up with the term the Politburo. It was members of the administration
Right.
that would quietly call them that. And it did end up being quite fitting. I would also say, if you look, especially when we get to the 2023, 2024 chapter, we obtained months of internal schedules, which are internally called the block. And the short answer to your question is yes. Like his internal schedule was also limited to sometimes those hours. And you can look at them. And I have like a screenshot of some of them too, where by October 2023, there were days, and there's one in particular that always comes to mind. I think it was like October 3rd, 2023, where the internal schedule had some normal meetings from like 10 to noonish, an hour for lunch, then 2 hours of what they called quote unquote POTUS time, then a half hour of desk time, then a 15-minute meeting with the chief of staff, and then he was to the residence for dinner and down the rest of the day at 4:30 p.m. That and the months of these schedules do show that the vast majority of important meetings were scheduled in the middle of the day. Also, there were veterans of past Democratic administrations were shocked at some of the meetings on important matters that the president was not involved in. And it was because he was 80. Listen, like it, and I think people think we're like picking on the guy. He was 80. He had limited bandwidth, and it did affect, according to senior administration officials and White House officials. We're not saying this. They were telling us this in the aftermath of the election, that it had effect on how this White House ran and how he governed.
So I want to follow up on that, although let me first defend only plenty of us have dinner at 4:30 p.m. from time to time. We get hungry. But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but the broader point is really important one. And let me ask you this then. It would seem to me that's a worthy topic for congressional oversight. It's a worthy topic for ongoing media inquiry. I'm not trying to kick people when they're down, but it has a Woodrow Wilson-y feel of who's running the country, and that is something that ought to be explored. Are you looking into it? Do you perceive that there is an ongoing appetite in the media? I mean, obviously the Hill's partisan and it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's not wrong that partisans look at stuff about the other party, but you guys are middle of the fairway, and Axios in particular is one of the most objective news organizations that's out there. Is this a story you are continuing to pursue, and should you and others?
I absolutely think me and others should pursue it. Honestly, I would have been even more involved if I had not been doing the book tour. But I watched the entirety of the Senate hearing today with that was chaired by Senator Cornyn and Schmidt. And basically, none of the Democrats showed up. They basically boycotted the hearing. Chairman Comer is having some senior aides sit down. If I had if Jake and I had subpoena power, I think the book would have been even better. But I think there is more that we don't know, and I do think it's completely, you know, I understand that people believe that, listen, like it's in the past, whatever. But I think it's both important as just a reporting matter, and I also think it could be important politically, both for the Republican and Democratic Party. You've seen a few ads here and there on the Republican side attacking Democrats for attesting to Joe Biden's competency. You've also seen a bunch of very young Democrats, older Democrats, for this reason. I think, Jake and I think both believe that we saw this as the first draft of the story, in part because, listen, we started on November 6th. We turned in the first draft after 200 interviews on January 31st. We got it out on May 20th. Like, it was a breakneck pace because we thought, listen, we want to get at least this first draft out fast. But I don't think I still believe this is very much a developing story, and I don't think we know the extent of the procedures taken to adapt to his limitations.
Well, Woodward and Bernstein did more than all the president's men, so maybe you guys have more in here. Um, so this is first and foremost a story of dishonesty by government leaders, but it's also a tale of the media dropping the ball. And you ably noted that when you were accepting the award from the White House Correspondents Association. And I'm interested in your macro take. How did the media fail here and why? Was it Trump derangement syndrome, partisan bias, fear of being called out for being ageist? The old Simon and Garfunkel, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest, keeps popping in my head. What's your take on what the media got wrong and why?
I mean, the thing is, it's like it's a bit of all of the above and more. I think people want to make, especially critics of the media, want to make the media a monolith. The media is not a monolith, especially White House correspondents. Like, listen, I don't know. I mean, people on this call probably know that, like, like Washington newsrooms have trouble scheduling a happy hour on a Tuesday. Like the idea that there would be this mass coordination to downplay Joe Biden's age, I just think is ridiculous. Now, is there like we're in Washington and Washington's a liberal city. Did reporters let their own political biases influence their coverage? I believe yes, 100%. But is that all of them or the majority of them? I don't think so. I also think there was, this sort of Washington groupthink that you've seen. I mean, I'm equating these two scenarios, but I think you can also like the way that the Washington media covered the Iraq War, and just like the lack of skepticism in post 9/11 world. And I think Washington media, in some cases, like in the post January 6th, post Trump world, there was that there are some parallels there. Um, I also think, um, you know, I think about this a lot because I feel after I did the reporting for this book with Jake, even I was like, I missed stuff. I missed a lot of stuff, but there was some stuff in there that I also could have gotten. I think, um, the social nature of Washington, in which we're all going to lots of parties and social events with all the same people. There is sometimes like a fear of like being the skunk at the garden party, if that makes sense. I think there was some of that. And I mean, the reason even though I was pretty aggressive on it, the reason why I made those remarks at the dinner was because I knew I hadn't done enough, and I think like, I mean, I don't come from this world at all, and I know that like people just like don't trust media anymore, and there's lots of reasons for that, that aren't our fault, but there are some that are, and I think it's important not to be defensive about it and to just actually try to rebuild trust by saying, "Hey, we should have done better."
Well, look, you're right. It's fun to dunk on the media, but at the same time, I would kind of go. I spent time thinking about, well, what could you have done differently, and would it have made a difference? I thought one of the most enlightening pieces of the book for me was to realize exactly how unfairly Robert Hur got treated. I mean, that guy gave up a lot. He came in as a straight down the middle, straight arrow, believes in the system and justice. His conclusion was he did break the law, but we wouldn't be able to get him because of the way like he was exactly right. He got crushed. For you were pointing out that you were getting criticized sort of around town and socially, even if your management at Axios had your back. They're always working the refs. It's hard to be a referee, and the more ref you suck is what everybody is screaming, the harder it is to keep making these calls. Knowing everything now, what would you have done differently, and would it have made a difference?
I don't. I think when reporters start thinking about should I write this story to make a difference, it's always sort of a dangerous like path to think about like the consequences of it. I think too many reporters do that. If I do anything differently, I mean, the main thing I would have done differently is, the especially 2022 and early 2023, I just would have the volume. I think I would have done so much more, even if they weren't going to give me anything. I think like the fact that they were so clearly shielding him from public scrutiny every single day that like he did not go without doing public remarks outside certain hours. Every single time, he forgot, that he said Mitterrand instead of Macron. Every single time that even some of the more public facing stuff to be more aggressive. I also just would have like, I didn't realize until early 2024 how big this was going to be as a story. I just would have I just would have burned the phones harder and focused on this as like this is the issue. But I didn't realize, and also like, when the deputy White House chief of staff is calling you a liar, it is intimidating. I'm just gonna be honest, like for myself, like it was intimidating. And it definitely made me like gut check myself and second guess myself. And obviously in retrospect, I would have been like, said, screw it, I trust my sources. But to your point, like you're always second guessing the motives of your sources, especially when they're anonymous. And so I was out on a limb, relying mostly on anonymous sources who I trusted and I believed. That's why I wrote it. But I was being called a liar by the White House on the record. And that definitely had an effect on like how much I focused on it and how often I did. And so, yeah.
Was there any, did it undermine, not you, but laterally anybody else at Axios who's like, I'm not getting any feedback from the administration sources who used to be helpful to me because they're pissed at you. I mean, it's sort of how the Trump White House now, if there's a reporter who they think is unfair, they may make it hurt the media outlet.
I think this speaks to both Jim and Mike's attitude, Jim Fennell and Mike Allen's attitude, but also the way that they hire people is, we are like a small team, but pretty cohesive. And yes, they 100%, my colleagues 100% got blowback from the White House for my reporting. But I also think it speaks to the culture at Axios and the people they hire that I never once felt that those colleagues were being like, don't do this. If anything, they like, because they told me every single time they got blowback from other people, they told me and they were like, you'll never believe this and that. Like it was, and which is why when I gave that speech at the White House Correspondents Center, like I thanked Hans Nichols, I thanked Barack Ravid, also Steph Kite did a bunch of stories with me. Like they, and also why I say, I was at Politico until early 2023. I don't know if this would have happened at the Politico I left. Not necessarily the Politico I joined, but the Politico I left. It was because like White Houses are very adept at trying to like undermine the culture of White House teams for their own purposes.
Do you get the sense and it's unfair, you made a great point, the media is not a monolith, but do you get the sense among those who cover the White House, or to the extent you have visibility across media, has the failure to adequately cover the story before the debate led to either changes in operation or a greater sort of self-awareness recognition that we were all missing something that really needed to be more meaningfully covered? Has behavior changed in your estimation?
I've actually been a little bit disappointed. I think, I said what I said at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, not exactly expecting to be the most popular person in the room, because I was implicitly and directly criticizing all of us, including myself. But honestly, I think the overall reaction from most people has just been to be defensive, and to think, oh, listen, we talked about age all the time. And this is something that really frustrates me. It's like you talked about age as a political liability, as like talked about the polls, and it was only in the frame of like this could hurt his ability to beat Trump. But there was not aggressive investigative reporting, in my opinion, about from most places. You obviously had the Wall Street Journal story in June 2024. There was not aggressive investigative reporting about how his age was actually impacting his ability to do his job, which there should have been, in my opinion, microscopic scrutiny of after he just said that he wanted to be president till January 2029, because any little thing that was being done to adjust his limitations in 2023 was going to be exponentially, bigger by 2027.
All right, for those tracking along, we aim to go till 4:45, so about 9 more minutes, 8.5 more minutes. Um,
I can also go an extra 5 or 10. So
I
if people
appreciate
want.
it. There's no chance at the moment we're not leaving everybody who hasn't actually read the book super eager to read the book. So we always want to leave them wanting a little bit more.
Okay, okay.
But uh, knowing what we know now, having experienced this, one thing I wonder about is, well, it's a two-parter. One, how does the media cover cognitive capability in the future? There are no official requirements. I always thought it's kind of bullshit when somebody's like, "Hey, I polled four psychiatrists and they tell me this guy's, bipolar." Like that's not legitimate. At the same time, you can go on these small little cues. I mean, Gerald Ford, who had no cognitive anything, was both one of the best athletes ever to be the president and a total klutz. Although I think Chevy Chase made us think even more than he was. When you think about covering, I mean, you now cover. There's a White House. The president is not far from turning 80, unless he already turned. I lost track. No, it was
Turned 79 on
79, right?
Saturday.
Just had the birthday at the parade. So how should the media figure out how to cover it in what is objective but informative is thought one, and then thought two, not to pull you out of your lane, but as a public policy matter. Did you walk away thinking there needs to be some new objective medical standard for, and then finish that sentence? Is it senators, congressmen? Is it okay if they're not cognitively impaired? They're just crazy. Like what? First, how do you think about coverage? And second, how do you think about actual governance and what they ought to do for people like that or Supreme Court?
Well, this is actually the one area about media stuff that I have detected a change that does make me sort of optimistic and feel just like grateful that I feel like the book had an impact. You saw the New York Times did a huge story on Congresswoman Eleanor Norton from Washington, D.C., who is, I believe, 88. Don't quote me on that, but has clearly been showing signs of decline for many years. And the New York Times like went at it in not like a kid glove way. And I even think the coverage of Feinstein, even when you get to like the New Yorker story, which was really rough, still treated her like in a kid glove way. I think Tad Cochran even like there has been this sort of weird taboo about talking about people aging and not being as good as they once were in DC. And uh, listen, they're collect. Not only are they collecting a government salary, they're making really consequential decisions. And uh, I think age is completely fair game, and on not just the presidential level, but the congressional and senatorial level. We've also had like several Democratic members of Congress die. The New York Times did an excellent story, I think like 2 weeks ago, that showed how like the median and average age of members of Congress has been as high as ever, and in a dramatic way. And to your second part of your question, which is about the public policy things, and I feel this actually strongly, which is that presidential health. I guess I'm like sort of revealing a lack of objectivity here. So, but I'm just gonna say it. Like there should be required. I believe there should be required instances of presidential health. And maybe that is that the White House physician submits the annual physical under penalty of perjury to Congress. Or you saw Senator Tillis today in the hearing in the Senate suggest that maybe the cabinet members have to, under penalty of perjury, attest to the president's fitness with the 25th Amendment sort of looming. I don't know what the idea is, but the reason I do feel this way is because covering up presidential infirmities is as old as America itself. You go back, George Washington hid many, many months where he was not really healthy. Grover Cleveland basically had a yacht become a operation room to remove a tumor from his mouth. Woodrow Wilson is the famous one. FDR had zero business running for re-election in 1944, and it was incredibly reckless, not only for him to run for election, but once he did win, he didn't even clue in to Harry Truman on anything that was going on with the war effort. JFK lied about having Addison's disease. Reagan, in like the parts of his term, it's lots of discussion, conversation. But the point is that presidents are always going to try to obfuscate, if not outright lie about their health. They always will, unless there is some sort of forcing mechanism to make people around them tell the truth. And I think, given the power that a president has, which essentially is, let's be honest, the ability to destroy the world, that the president's health should not be a private matter.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you, and if you read the book, even more will agree with you. You obviously did some research. John Morris had put in the chat a question similar to one I'd been asking about. Did you go back and, I remember early on when this story, I don't know if it was before your book or after, but folks were saying, Reagan, Reagan was had deteriorated. You certainly watched the last Reagan press conference, which my buddy Peggy Noonan wrote about and put in Twitter. Guy's a suit and tie. He's taking, fastballs and he's hitting lots of line drives. I mean, it's it's a far cry difference. What I do wonder about is you're right that presidential health is a matter. Same with, for that matter, I would argue their finances are a matter of public. The public needs to know. At the same time, I'm not sure there's not an objective test where it's like, oh, okay, either you're cognitively healthy or you're not. Maybe your fastball has slowed down, but you've developed a curve, which is true in MLB. And you could, I forget who the pitcher recently, they just said a great Wall Street Journal story. He's slowed down and he's now striking more people out, but not remembering it is not helpful here. But it sounds like did you guys, as part of this, do the research on historical candidates and presidents who had cognitive issues, or given the insane sprint from November to January, was this all let's revisit this campaign basically this year with a little bit around it and not get overcomplicated?
So when we pitched the book, we pitched it at 50,000 words because it was a quick story. And then we ended up writing 115,000. And then we had to cut it down, given like the pace of the schedule, to 85,000. The reason I mention this is because we had so much information about past presidents. This has actually been, weirdly now, I realize the parallels and why this sort of made sense for me to focus in on this story. You can go back. I wrote a Politico magazine story, I believe it was 2015 or 2016, which was about presidents and mental health and the lack of disclosure. Nixon was taking Valium, we now know, as president, and was taking a bunch of the predecessors to Valium when he was vice president. JFK was taking so many drugs. And I think you can look it up. It's Politico magazine. Like, would we elect a mentally ill president? We already have. Um, and they, uh, I do think just the sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I just think that, even though it's uncomfortable to talk about these issues, that we have to, especially given in America the power that we bestow the president. I don't know if I totally answered your question. Is there like another part?
No, I mean, I think you did, and your depth of knowledge before I asked the question was pretty exhaustive there. Here's my last question for you, Alex.
Okay.
Because it's been, again, it's an unbelievable book. I'm psyched I got my wife to plow through it. She loved it too, which is always a good barometer to me for a non-complete crazy junkie. Um, uh, who are the heroes? There's a lot of blame that goes around from the Politburo to the family. Some people, to your point, are dunking on media. Others, I kind of take I'm not, if I were in the media and people were saying I'm lying, like, I'm not sure how much further over your skis you could have gotten. But Let's start to make it a little bit fairer and easier. I'm going to remove Axios is a hero. You're a hero. Um, I'm interested in who you think were brave in the face of a difficult story to report for all the reasons we described, and concurrently, in addition to Axios, which everyone should read every day, what are you finding publications outside the mainstream? We're all going to follow Rick Klein from ABC and Alex Gangitano, a great White House correspondent for The Hill. Um, I work really hard to make sure I have a balanced media diet, left and right, but also inside the Beltway, and then who's taking perspectives further away. Tell me the heroes and tell me where you turn sometimes to try to get a fresher perspective than we collectively can find in this echo chamber we live in.
Okay, so a few thoughts on this. In terms of the heroes of the book, I mean, there aren't many. In all honesty, I mean, in some ways, I think of this book actually as like the movie movie Titanic, which is we all know what's coming, and we all know it's going to end in tragedy. And the book, once the iceberg hits, which in my mind at least, is when the debate is incredibly dramatic and sad. But there's a reason why we frame it as a Greek tragedy. There are very few heroes in Greek tragedy. Now, that being said, I think the two heroes, besides Axios, obviously, are Robert Hur and Dean Phillips. Um, Representative Dean Phillips of Minnesota tried to get other people to run against Joe Biden. He, as a member of Congress, had seen the decline, saw that not only would this impact his ability to do the job, but would also impact his ability to win again, and spoke up privately for months. And then when no leader of the Democratic Party had the courage to do anything about it, he launched a quixotic run for the nomination. He knew that he almost certainly wouldn't win. And also the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, took steps to make sure that he had no chance of winning, including trying to kick him off the ballot in many states. Uh, and he did it anyway. And there's a reason why he is now former Representative Dean Phillips, is because he did that. He could have easily kept his seat and not done anything. I think he is like a hero of the story. Robert Hur was, I can tell you, the Biden White House, the Biden campaign dropped Oppo on Robert Hur. I mean, the president himself lied, or at least did not tell the truth, whatever you think about motivations. The night the Hur report came out, Biden said that Hur was the one that brought up Beau Biden, and when Biden didn't remember what year Beau Biden died, that was not true. The transcript very clearly makes clear it's not true. Um, that Robert Hur never mentioned Beau Biden, but a lot of people just took Biden's denial at face value. Um, and Robert Hur also paid a price. He could not find a job for months. And also, it's a funny part of the book that I do think it still makes me laugh is that Robert Hur, when he was appointed, had no idea that he was being appointed to investigate Joe Biden. When he was asked, he was told a senior administration official. And all of his colleagues were like, it's career suicide. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Blah, 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 blah. And he was like, I feel like I should do it. And but he still went back to the administration and was like, can you tell me anything more about who this person is? And he was told, it's a very senior administration official. And he still did it anyway. And so I think those are the two. There's not a lot of heroes in the story, but I think those are definitely the two. And please forgive me. What's the second part of the question?
Where do you sometimes turn outside traditional
Yes. Okay.
media
Got it.
where
Got
you
it.
feel like you get a fresh perspective? Could be Substacks.
Yeah. I think Substacks are probably the main. area outside of traditional media that I get a lot. So, and I subscribe to so many. Um, on the sort of the right or center right end, definitely do the Free Press. John Ellis's news items. I subscribe to both of those. I read them basically every day on the left leaning side. Uh, Matt Iglesias, Andrew Sullivan on sort of the left wing side. Uh,
Wow, you're putting Andrew Sullivan on the left wing slide. He's gonna
oh
not be happy
no
with you.
no sorry, he's not the left wing side.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I was saying like more left-ish side. He's definitely a centrist. But I was going to say on the left wing side, I also subscribe to, some of the former like Gawker people, and then also like Drop Site with like Ryan Grimm, um, and what's his, oh, we like, that met. He used to have the MSNBC show. I don't know why I'm like totally blanking. It's not Matthias, but it's Hassan. Mati Hassan. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, those are like a few of the places that I subscribe and listen to. And I think Substack is actually a really great platform for outside mainstream media. And actually, when you ask that question, those the Substacks I've subscribed to and pay for are some of the main ones. Another sort of fun one. He doesn't post as much anymore, but for a while, Dominic Cummings from the UK. He was a top advisor to Boris Johnson, and then had a big breakup. But he's very much, if you haven't watched the HBO movie Brexit, he's sort of with Benedict Cumberbatch, he's sort of a main character. He was always sort of an interesting and flamboyant Substacker for a while. He's like toned down recently, or at least doesn't post as much, but he was another person that I sometimes listen to.
Awesome. Alex, you've been generous with your time. The book is Original Sin. It's awesome. We'll send a link to everybody to just enter your address so that it can be mailed to you. Thank you for your time. Good luck with both the rest of the tour, if there's any left, and the next book.
Thank you so much. And I'm on all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. So if anyone that's on this call like reads the book and has any additional question or just has any like thoughts after they read it, I love to know.